Council meeting of May 22nd to order. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Orlando, Councillor English, all those in favor, motion's carried. And need a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular council meeting of May the 8th. Councillor English, Councillor Sauls, all those in favor, motion's carried. And adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting of May 10th. Councillor English and Councillor Orlando, all those in favor, motion's carried. Is there any business arising from the regular council meeting of May the 8th? Any business arising from the special council minutes of May the 10th? I thought to help our delegations out a little bit, we would change the order, and I would like to move right into delegations right now. And our first delegation is community paramedics, Kelly Christie and Carly Taylor. You're the observer? You got it. All right. Nice. If you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium, ladies. Thank you.
Some really good comments there today. Yeah.
Mayor McKee, City Council, and everyone in attendance, thank you very much for inviting us today. We are honored to share this amazing program with everyone in attendance. We're going to give you a community overview of the paramedicine program, the CPs in the community, myself, Kelly Christie, and friend and co-worker Carly Taylor. The program partners are healthcare providers in the community. Program objectives are to stabilize paramedic staffing in the rural and remote communities and bridge health services delivery gaps identified in collaboration with local primary teams. British Columbia is improving access to health care in rural and remote communities through the introduction of community paramedicine. Community paramedicine is intended to help address issues such as the lack of access to primary care for medically underserved populations, increasing demand for healthcare services based on an aging population, shortages of healthcare providers, and recruitment and retention of paramedics in BC's smaller communities. Population profile is older people living on their own, living with chronic conditions such as heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, those that are in increased risk of falls, and those that need support with palliative approach to care. They're referred by their doctor or other primary health care providers. This service is provided at no cost to the patient. This chart shows the allocation of communities and CP positions by health authorities. A total of 99 rural and remote communities have now been selected for the program. All communities were selected in consultation with the health authorities. The goal of creating 80 full-time equivalent community paramedic positions has been achieved. This translates into 106 new regular part-time positions and 23 full-time positions. As of mid-April, there are 105 community paramedics providing services in 84 communities. This is the provincial rollout. It shows you, it started in the north the northern region, rolled out in the interior, then the island, and then the coastal. Fraser has Boston Bar so far. Your community paramedicine team, myself, and Carolee work from Tuesday to Friday. We have 10 hours a day allotted to patient contacts in the home, as well as community development in healthcare. We go into the schools and provide drills on how to call 911. We are also planning, in that regard, on June 1st, a hands-only CPR and AED training free of charge to the public of all age groups at the community center. The posters will be put up shortly, and we'd like to see as many people in town participate in this. We are supported by Chris Huey, our regional training officer, and by Kirk Patulis, our unit chief, and our co-workers. Community paramedics provide services in 3 broad areas, beginning with community health promotion and awareness. Examples include actively promoting CP services and looking for ways to collaborate with other community groups. Participating in a community event where the community paramedic is not providing services but is gaining exposure by the presence of the CP attending the event. Collaborating with the local health authority teams to identify potential patients. Attending local health team meetings to provide updates and outcomes of CP services delivered. 2, delivering a presentation to the community regarding non-clinical education. The second area is supporting community health and wellness clinics. We participate in pre-existing health authority clinics, wellness events, and group medical check-ins to provide clinical support. The second area is supporting community health and wellness clinics. Oh, that's it. Slide 12. Where am I? Sorry, that's good. Provide wellness checks to previously identified patients who would benefit from visits in their home. We support patient self-care by providing education, perform risk screening assessments, perform physical assessments, track and send those findings, report all findings to their health team, and support patient advocacy and health system navigation. Examples include supporting palliative patients and caregivers with comfort care measures, providing home health monitoring services. Right now, it's in select locations only. How the CPs help the patients is we come to their house for regularly scheduled visits. We help the patients stay connected with their family doctor or nurse practitioner. We support the patients in managing their health so that they continue to live at home safely. And we check in with patients about their medications. We look for fall hazards in the home and suggest ways of correcting them. We refer patients to the right healthcare resource when they need additional help. We listen when patients have concerns about their health and work with them to get the assistance they need. The Community Paramedicine Program is being implemented by BC Emergency Health Services, working with the Ministry of Health, regional health authorities, the Ambulance Paramedics of British Columbia, QP 873, the First Nations Health Authority, and others. Program partners are represented on the provincial, practice, and evaluation advisory committees. Health authorities and the Community Paramedicine Project team work together on regional steering committees. You can go online at either of these sites, and you can email any question that you may have to that. There's on our cards, there's also, you can direct locally to us as well if you have a concern. We appreciate your time and your support in the community and to all of the other resource areas that we go to meetings with and take feedback from. Thank you very much.
Any comments or questions from council? If you might just hang on just a second, Kelly. Councilor Brothers?
Just a question. I mean, if this is going to go throughout the province, is every rural community going to have a couple of people like you that are based in the community itself, or are you going to travel, or how's that going
No,
to work?
we don't travel. So we have 2 positions here. For example, Sycamoose has a couple, Lumbee has one, and those are just off the top of my head. Like you can go online to one of those websites there and find out all the communities in the province that have them, and they are now too starting to roll out advanced care community paramedics. So they have a much larger scope of practice than we do. And I know just off the top of my head that they are doing one in Campbell River. Can you give another one off the top of your
Not off
head?
the top of my head, but Campbell River, and I think it was Courtney or something. We met a couple of them actually at the training for the palliative care, and I think it's going to be a bigger learning curve for them than it will be for us because their scope of practice is so much bigger. We found that in Revelstoke, the support from the healthcare providers of every aspect, from the care aides in the homes to the local doctors and practitioners and everybody else concerned, has been amazing. It's a little slow to get off the ground like any other project, but we're hoping that it'll continue to grow.
But it supplements the great infrastructure that we have.
Yes, yes. And I think that's our biggest project, or the biggest part of our project when you're looking at it is to bridge those gaps between the patients, their healthcare providers, the families, and the other support systems that they may or may not be aware or even in our community.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I know you both, you're going to do a great job, and I think this is just one more aspect to the team. You're going to help people through our long winters, not to fall through the gaps, and I think you're going to be well respected part of the team. So kudos,
Thank you,
and I
Linda.
hope it all works out great for you.
Great, thanks.
So the question I have is that I look at this as being kind of a proactive healthcare where you're going in and helping people, and so are you meeting these people by them inviting you in, or being referred by another health practitioner?
Yeah, so usually it's a doctor. It doesn't have to be. We've also received referrals from the nurse practitioner in town, even a nurse that might be working in Emerge, who sees somebody in Emerge and says, oh, well, they might benefit from having, myself or Kelly come in and have a visit. So.
Because I just think that there is a certain percentage of the population that can't manage or are having trouble, and they don't realize what's going on, and their neighbors or family are probably really concerned, and this would be an avenue that may really offer a different type of more personalized help that they
And we, we're lucky, and we are able to spend that time with these people in their homes, whereas the nurse practitioner, for example, might be so busy and so overworked that she might not be able to spend the 15 minutes, whereas we have
We're flexible.
We have pretty flexible schedules, so we can spend an hour with them.
Good. Well, good for you. I think it's a great program, and I think there's a real big need for something like this. So, okay. Anyways, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next delegation is Revelstoke Mountain Resort. We have Peter Nielsen is going to give us an update on the MDA update. Thanks for coming, Peter.
Thanks for having me. Oh, here, I'll do that. First of all, apologize for my analog visuals. I will provide these electronic. They are actually embedded in the document. But first of all, thank you for having me and allowing me a little time to talk about Master Development Plan update that was recently accepted by the province. I thought I'd start off with a little bit of an update on just a quick update on how the previous season went. And happy to report had a record season, saw around 7% growth in visitation, really born on a growth in destination visitors. And as reflected in this plan, growth is going to our opportunity for growth is really through those destination travelers. So a lot of our focus is on marketing and providing amenities for that type of traffic. We've actually seen decreases in regional traffic. If we look at regional as being drive traffic, but we've more than made up for that destination traffic. Most of our growth is coming from Southern Colorado Collective has been a big part of that. And we really feel that that's going to continue to trend what we're see. We recently joined forces with a company called Altera, which you may or may not have heard of. They fly under the brand of Icon Resort. Second one. Asked to become part of this path, which the magnitude of say something like that, collected on the primary market, probably tenfold potential for visitation. So very excited about that. And I mean, some of the things that I'm going to talk about as far as the update kind of reflect back to some of the things we're seeing on the ground. The document's public. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to look at it entirely. And I'm going to entertain questions if anyone has any, but I kind of broke it into three pieces that I thought would be of most interest for you. And I mean, the whole idea of the update is really twofold. One, to provide an inventory to the province of what has been completed to date and and to the province and the public. So what has been developed, where is it, and then also to kind of update phasing. That was our primary goal. So an update doesn't go into the plan and change it. We definitely are honoring the original master development plan. However, within that, there's lots of room for shuffling things as far as timelines and phasing. Quite often it's referred to as phasing. So I have three visuals. I broke it down into winter activities, summer activities, and real estate and base area activities, or base area development. So what you see here is comes directly from the plan here. If you want a reference to it, this is the ski area. So it represents all the lifts in the master development plan and the phasing of said lifts. With the lifts, the original phasing kind of got thrown out the window when we started the original development, and we really focused on maximizing skiable terrain accessible from the lifts initially. And those are represented by the Revolution Drive was here, Silk Chair there, River Chair is there. That's all the nature of this infrastructure. We've identified three lifts that are near future, and that would be lift number 1, which would provide secondary access to the base, and provide lift access to some of the real estate development. Lift number 11, which goes from river top and provides enhanced connectivity to the river chair. It also provides a true green commuting area. And lift 18, which is one of the largest expansions of terrain from all anything within the plan. Happy to say that lift 11 is a green light project for us. We start the groundwork on it as soon as we know the original development, with the intention of installing next summer. So we'll be doing the groundwork for lift 11 is quite very, very expensive, because it's not just about the lift, but about the terrain. And the reasoning behind lift 11 having no priority, and the reason we're doing it first is really to increase our green capability. Along with the installation of lift 11, we'll be moving our entire beginner program to the top of the gondola, and then be creating facilities behind that to accommodate more people at the top of the gondola. So that involves beginner carpet and a few other things as far as being able to provide progression and skiing right from top of the gondola. So your first experience as a skier will be riding the gondola into some pretty scenic terrain and having which can be questionable weather down here as far as hitting sometimes February rain to the base, whereas you're going to have a really positive experience in there. The secondary reason for lift 11 is really to provide connectivity from the top of the gondola over the river chair. Right now we're dependent on the Silk Chair to provide all uphill access in the outline implemented enhancements this last year for lift capability was because of that bottlenecking. However, we really believe this is going to push people immediately out of pocket on the river area, which will facilitate us developing a lot more terrain over the river area. So really that area has been almost untouched, but a little bit lately since it was completed. There's an enormous, you can see on the map, an enormous area. And we start doing run development this summer over here in anticipation of this lift building. So if we can see our enhancement, experience enhancement as early as next season in the river there, pretty extensive logging and grading programs going on. And the intention is to continue to add to that as we provide more and more easier access to that. Likely the lift that would be going in after that would be lift 18. This is the kind of big marketing story, major expansion, provides intermediate true bolting along with an expansion of the steers in the rim, pretty awesome trade. So this is very exciting as well. But we're proceeding with what the other pretty much as we speak to wait for some questions on it?
Is 18, is that opening up like jalapeno hot sauce? Is that over in that area?
Yeah, correct. So on the original plan, it actually goes above the top of the stoke, but to the liquor's right or Spears bucket, terminates down lower into the South Bolton area there. We're working on alignment there. We think that alignment's probably going to shift a bit. We've learned a lot by utilizing the area from one of the original designs. But basically it's the same layout. Maybe slightly shorter and a little bit to liquor's right. We're still finalizing that.
Councillor Diggs, you have your hand up?
No, I didn't, although this is really exciting.
And then part of our whole process of going through the MBA document or an MVP update, we've engaged two different companies. One, a company that specializes in the lift area or the skier side of development, and that's who we're engaging with as we work through such. And we've got another consultant who's working on our base area. And we really, the climate right now is very much one of investment. And we're having a visioning meeting in early June with a bunch of industry stakeholders, along with our consultants. And that'll dictate what we kind of have our 2-year plan right now, what our 5 and 10-year plan look like. So I'm happy to talk to kind of what the green light capital investments that we have right now. But we're definitely looking for a little bit more consultation on our 5 and 10-year stuff. I'll move on to summer. This is, real quick, this is a overview of trail development on the mountain from a summer perspective. All the phasing in here is getting kind of complicated as far as how much spacing there is. The pink stuff is all done. This green stuff is all done. And this phase here is what we're working on this summer. So we've hopefully somebody did up and seen some of the trail work we've done. We completed a lot of trail work that was not accessible last summer because it was in the works. And so we have a really proud of the hiking product we're going to be offering this summer because it's quite expanded from last year. This whole green loop here is completed, but will be completed at the end of it. And that, they're multi-use trails up in the Alpine. And so they'll be utilized as outdoor track a lot for hiking as well as hiking. So kind of carefully thought out whether it be hiker and biker interactions. So the overrides are considered to bypass people. The big trail that we're working on this year is going to be down what we're calling the 56-point trip. But it's not mountain. But that's going to provide a full downhill trail from the FL. Our plan is to launch with access next summer. So beginning next summer. And our concept for biking on mountain is really about access cross-country rides. We're not going to be opening downtown Mountain Bike Park, nor will we likely go to downtown Mountain Bike Park business. But we really feel this is a sweet spot outside the market for destination travelers as far as bikers. So you have an epic ride of essentially doing a curb chain with, but not leaving all that gravity up there. So we're going to have a pretty bumpy ride down. So that will be ready next year. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll be doing in phases. Likely in the trail building business for many foreseeable years. So very excited about that. Really excited about launching our extended program this year. It was launched last year with a lot of success. I think the product is probably 5 times better this year as far as the expansion of it. So I encourage you all to come and see it. We open June 23rd for our upper mountain sightseeing. Any questions on?
Nixon?
Peter, can you just touch base on what the plans are for the Selkirk Tangier part of the business for the heli biking on Mount Cartier? You hold tenure there and have been recently.
Yeah, absolutely. We put a lot of work and considerable investment in that tenure and acquiring it and getting it ready for it to be serviced. And we don't plan to operate in this season. However, we are in discussion with some other operators and potentially working on a tenure agreement. But I can't really comment on that.
Okay.
But we don't plan to release that tenure though.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Please,
Mr. Duke?
Yeah, not a question. Just I think this is the right angle to hit that market sweet spot. We have a lot of really downhill options that are available, and I think this is really going to do well for you guys and the community.
Yeah, we really thank you, and appreciate that. We really look at this as being one or 2 days of your trip to Revelstoke as a biker, and really want to be complementary to the existing bike trail networks and the future bike trail networks that are going to exist. And we, I think we can work in conjunction and be part of like a real week-long trip or a 5-day trip or a long weekend trip for those destination bikers that have lots of variety, and really wanted to make sure that we working with and being complementary to what's existing. Great. Any other questions?
Councilor Nixon?
Peter, just on the golf course plans around Williamson's Lake, it kind of shows on the map that
Yep.
it almost completely surrounds Williamson's Lake. Is that land all under your umbrella now, other than the city campground and access?
No, there are, and that's part of, we're in the revision of the process of revising
Okay.
the golf course plan as we speak.
Oh, okay.
And the potential to acquire some lands is there, potentially, but not, the original plan lands are not all under control. Or,
Not all locked down.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
I think it's worthwhile to point out that through the master planning process, when a company, and I was involved somewhat in the early discussions, is that the idea is that when you do a master plan for a development like this, you do the best plan you can regardless of who owns the property, because the property could be changing. Your commercial recreation area is obviously more restricted, but when you're doing a bigger plan, you do the best plan that you can, and if it works out fine, that's what this update is all about now, is to rejig what actually was in the original plan and what is reality today, as well as talking about future plans. So some people, they look at it and say, why is my property included? Doesn't mean that you're forced to sell or do anything, but there may be an opportunity in the future that the resort may be interested in going in that direction. So just wanted to clarify some of that, the way that land was configured previously.
Yeah, that's a good, very good point. And recognizing that the kind of flavor of the day for golf has changed a little bit as far as what exactly people want. Not that I'm an expert on golf, I will not barely swing a club, but there's different elements that maybe weren't kind of thought out in the initial planning. So I'm pretty happy with the plan. It was a great one. I'll move on to...
Yep.
Great. So this is a visual representation of the base area. Phase 1, 2, and 3, phase 1 and 2, sorry, basically complete. Broken phase 3 into 3 pieces. One piece being the hotel that's currently with the development permit, and that's the core of part of phase 1, phase A, 3A, which we hope to return on this year, but that's in process. And they also recognize this an area that we targeted for potentially some mixed-use development. That's one of the things that's why we're going to phase 3 and 3 pieces. We really, as we get through the other end of this planning process that will be finished by the end of June, a lot of it speaking to the order of things that we want to do as far as here, as far as basic development and real estate opportunities, and whether real estate is right play or wholly owned properties with the blue. So the first one is the wholly owned property, which is the hotel. Within phase 3 is also where we're contemplating staff housing as well. That's a outline topic and one that we recognize we can really want to see start to get ahead of so we're going to make that that's targeted in phase 3. And phase 3B speaks to golf course lines. We struggled with these phases a lot, and really will hopefully have a really solid plan as far as what a 5-year plan, capital spending plan is. Probably sometime in July or August we'll go publicly about it. So I can really speak for 2 years, but the 5 and 10 are, we know we want to invest, but the order of things we want to do all that huge stuff. Questions or comments?
Councillor Brothers.
While I have a chance, Peter, this is really exciting, and I think what it does, you coming here and presenting this really gives the public and Rebel Stokians an idea that, you know, what's going on in the mountain, and all those questions are being sort of answered now. So I really appreciate it, and I think it's great. I think it's great progress. A couple of questions.
Please.
Can I pin you down a bit more on the staff housing? Do you have more information on there? I know you're saying that you're contemplating it. And the second question is, in terms of real estate, is that, I know you say, again, you're contemplating that we have such a housing crisis here. Part of it's vacation rentals and the fact that they're being used up both for staff housing and within the city. So is there a little bit more detail on that?
First question, staff housing. We've identified an area that we believe is suited, but it's obviously the planning process we need to go through for that. And it is, we want to also, kind of the process we're going through for these baselines is really, we've engaged, we'll be about probably $250,000 into the planning process, just the planning process alone for this, including the lift plans. But that we've developed a full plan using our internal expertise and some of the consultants that I spoke to earlier. With some industry kind of sages, if you will. We've invited some ski industry, former CEOs, that sort of thing, and then outside of that, hospitality industry and other industries, transportation industries, kind of gear plan up. Hopefully when we go through that, they do great. They come up with better ideas, awesome. And then we'll move forward and start proving real, actually look at it and go to the planning department, is this realistic that we're, putting X number of units and stuff out in this location. So a little bit early to speak to it, but I've seen drawings. And it's pretty significant. And sort of, that kind of spoke to both of your questions at the same time, but it really, I think within the next 3 or 4 months, because we'll have a lot better articulation of what that real estate play looks like. We have a lot of inventory in a certain style as far as lots and condos, and there isn't a lot of demand for them. I mean, there's a reason we don't have them on the market. Kind of the secondary sales aren't selling at 50% discount. So, if you really want to get the next real estate play right, and with the right product, the right time, in the right market.
Councillor Nixon.
Peter, thanks for coming today. This is something I've nagged about as well, staff housing and seeing the plan. Like, I've been nagging for a few years here. Is any representative of RMR sitting on the Housing Society, or do they attend any of the Housing Society meetings?
Not currently, no.
It might be something to look at, just to keep that communication going for the community moving forward, just something to consider. And, because a void of information starts rumors. And I think that, I know you're very, very busy personally, and your staff are too, but I just think that might be something to consider this next winter. Absolutely,
and I mean, we have been engaging with the stuff with different communities in regards to the staff housing situation. So, a few different individuals, and I've sat in quite a few different meetings just to give my opinion and our opinion as far as next steps, what would work, but no formal delegation or formal seat at that housing, which is a good idea.
Something to consider.
Oh, I think it's a good idea, really good idea. Thank you.
I want to thank you for the update, Peter. It's we're in an interesting position here in a situation with the resort and the way that it's built out to date. And I know that the provincial government brought in the Alpine ski policy to protect communities from developments where a developer would come in and say, I'm going to build this great ski resort, or I'm going to build this great golf course, and but we need to do all this real estate development. So what would happen then is that a whole bunch of real estate would be developed, sold, lots would be sold, and then the resort or the golf course wouldn't come, and all these people bought resort property. So they came up, the Alpine ski policy, they came up with, you earn development rights by putting infrastructure on the mountain. And I know that putting the gondola up in Mid-Station and the base and the coaster and all the things that you've done, and it's quite a long list, over, I think, $200 million. But you've earned like 5,000 bed units of credit that you can do in development. So, and you've done just over 1,000 or just under 1,100, I believe is the number. So you've got around a 4,000 bed unit credit that you can develop with the infrastructure that you already have on the mountain. So, but to come here and then say, well, this is our plan, we're looking at these lists, we're looking at this stuff here, shows that, the market and your attitude, the company's attitude on being positive towards the market future. And it's good for us. I want to echo what Councillor Nixon and Councillor Brothers said, is that it's going to be nice to get past that first phase, seeing employee housing, because the whole community is crying for it. Your business is crying for places for employees, and but I think that we're on a good path. I see lots of great amenities coming, and good on you guys for stepping up, and I see lots of great things for the future of the community.
I appreciate that. And I mean, speaking to the Alpine policy and the bed unit credit, I mean, this is a unique kind of resort offering inside of BC because of its location inside of city limits, and just there's the town being right beside it. The right to earn those bed units if you're in a pocket where there is no development around it. The market, if you have market, the resort operator benefits from the real estate perspective. Whereas when we're parked right in city limits, it's a really good benefit for landholders in the city and investors in the city, because a lot of that spin-off benefit is spun into the city. And I think I can confidently say that a lot of the development we see, the additional hotel rooms, the additional vacation rentals, I promise I would say that I did. And just a lot of the additional business operations, can be traced back to the resort development. So, I mean, that definitely affects pace of capital investment because you're not realizing all benefit from your capital infrastructure investment on resort. But that's not to say it's a bad thing. That's just the reality of it. I think we've got something very special and very, very unique in the fact that the incredible city of Revelstoke is right at the base of the resort, and I'm just looking forward to seeing the two grow closer together over the years to come.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Peter.
Great, thank you.
Just as Peter's getting organized, I was going to say if delegations would like to vacate, feel free. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
All good news. Yeah.
So we have two public hearings today, and I'm going to open the first public hearing and read a statement on how the public hearing is going to be run. This preamble will apply to the second public hearing as well. So I'd like to call this public hearing to order, and this is for Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 2226 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2227, which is 908 Douglas Street. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representations to council, and all persons present who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaw will be given the opportunity to address council or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Those of you who wish to speak concerning this proposed bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Do we have anybody on the speakers list?
Not for now. No, we don't actually don't motion.
Please observe these rules, and if you have any concerns with the manner in which the hearing is conducted, direct your comments to the chair. Members of council may, if they wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of council today is to listen to the views of the public. It's not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Everyone shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views heard. In considering the proposed bylaw, council may have received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review on the sign-in table or alternatively on the city's website. I will be going out to the public 3 times for comments on the public hearing bylaw, and before we begin, I'd like to ask the corporate officer to confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act. Thank you. And we're going to have a presentation from Mr. Whitehead.
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you. This is a public hearing for a proposed OCP and zoning amendment for a property located at the corner of Douglas and Charles Street. You can see it here. This is what it looks like from Douglas. At the May 8th council meeting, council gave first and second readings to amend the OCP designation from T4O neighborhood mixed use to T4 walk-up residential, and amend the zoning bylaw from C5 tourist commercial to R2 single and two-family residential. The property appears to have once been part of the old Central Motel development at 900 Douglas. You can see it right here next door. Likely used as a caretaker or an office. As such, the property is currently designated in the OCP and zoned for commercial use. In order to allow the applicants at 908 Douglas to legalize the current residential use and to undertake future renovations of the building, the property needs to be rezoned to reflect the residential use of the property. No written comments were received from the public. Staff are supportive of this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. So I'm going out to the public for the first time. If there's any comments on this Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 2226 or Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2227 for 908 Douglas Street. Is there any members from the public that wish to speak at this public hearing? For a second time, is there anyone that wishes to speak to this official community plan amendment bylaw and zoning amendment bylaw? Any comments or questions from council? For a third and final time, is there anyone that wishes to speak to this official community plan amendment bylaw 2226 and zoning amendment bylaw 2227 for 908 Douglas Street? Looking for a motion to close this public hearing. Councillor English, Councillor Souls, all those in favor, motion's carried. And there is a motion, another motion there.
I can bring forward these further motions. That official community plan amendment bylaw number 2226 be read a third time.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All in favor? Motion carried.
I'll bring forward that official community plan amendment bylaw number 2226 be adopted.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Now continue to move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2227 be read a third time.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. And discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
And lastly, the zoning amendment bylaw number 2227 be adopted.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. So we're going to move right into our next public hearing, which is zoning text amendment bylaw 2224, the cannabis. And again, all the preamble to the conduct of the public hearing is still valid. And I would like to ask the corporate officer to confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act.
Yes, Your Worship, there was one submission from the Local Development Committee, and you have that in that.
Very good, thank you. And the presentation, Mr. Whitehead?
Yes, Your Worship. At the April 10th, 2018 council meeting, council gave first and second readings to zoning amendment bylaw number 2224 in anticipation of the legalization of cannabis in the coming months. This bylaw amendment proposes an interim prohibition of specific land uses, including cannabis dispensaries, both recreational and medical, commercial cannabis manufacturing and production, and it also clarifies that horticulture, where permitted, would not include the growing of cannabis at this time. The intent of this interim exclusion of particular land uses is to allow time for staff to develop, in consultation with the community regulatory development, to consider permitting commercial retail sales and production of cannabis within the city boundaries. This is a recommended best practice by legal advisors in BC. For example, if an exclusion of these commercial uses or local regulations, if they're not in place by the time legalization occurs, then the city opens the door to allowing commercial cannabis sales and production in any zone where retail sales or manufacturing or horticulture is normally permitted. So this bylaw amendment will prevent the development of those opening at that time to prevent legal non-conforming uses in the future. The proposed bylaw amendment will not affect personal use of recreational cannabis once legalized, provided said personal use is in compliance with any other federal, provincial, or municipal legislation. So an example of that is federal legislation is likely going to allow the growing of 4 cannabis plants in your own home. However, the province is considering additional legislation on top of that will restrict the growing of those 4 plants depending on the tenancy agreement of whether you're renting or owning or in a strata or not. So that hasn't been ironed out yet at the provincial level, but this bylaw amendment wouldn't affect that. It wouldn't layer anything on top of what the province is already looking at. Another example of that would be this bylaw would not prohibit personal consumption of cannabis, but the city's clean air bylaw would apply, which applies to both tobacco and cannabis. And so that would prohibit smoking or vaping in city parks and in other locations within the city. The proposed bylaw amendment would also not affect Health Canada permit holders for production of cannabis for medical purposes. Staff anticipate, while this interim prohibition of the land uses of retail sales, commercial production are in place, that over the summer a third-party planning consultant will be secured by city staff and will develop a regulatory framework for what commercial retail sales could look like in Revelstoke. That would include some aspect of public engagement. An FAQ sheet was developed by staff and released online to the public last week. And as discussed by the corporate officer, one written comment from the Social Development Committee was received requesting their involvement in the development of regulations over the summer. Should Council give third reading after the public hearing, the amendment bylaw will be forwarded to the Ministry of Transportation for approval. As it affects the entire zoning bylaw, they get a final approval over that, and then it would be returned back to a future council meeting for adoption.
But I think that if all those things fall into place, the intent here, if the federal government follows through and makes cannabis a legal entity, legal business, we then would start another process of zoning text amendment to allow it, but incorporating all those comments from the public and the province and the federal regulations where it would be allowed and where we think is appropriate and what is acceptable to this community. And we would go through this process again to legalize it with our restrictions on it.
Correct. That is the intent of this.
I just wanted to be clear there to the public and the people in the audience that this is only the first step. If it becomes legal, the next step will follow where it will become legal here as well. So this public hearing is open to the public and looking for any comments from the public on this zoning text amendment bylaw. I thought they would be lined up at the microphone. For a second time, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak at this public hearing on the zoning text amendment bylaw, whatever number it is? I don't count.
2224.
2224. Any comments or questions from council? Going back to the public for a third and final time on this zoning text amendment bylaw 2224 on cannabis regulation. Looking for a motion to close this public hearing. Councillor English, Councillor Souls, all those in favor, motion's carried.
I'll move forward the second part of this amendment bylaw. The zoning text amendment bylaw number 2224 be read a third time.
Motion by Councillor Duke, second by Councillor Nixon. Discussion.
Comment. I think we're really doing the right thing here. Bringing cannabis in and this new legislation is a big thing simply because it's an unknown. A lot of communities in the U.S. have struggled with it. Communities in Canada have struggled with it. And I think going slowly and making sure we get it right, especially because we have families and children and it affects all aspects of the community. So I think this is just good legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, we heard that at Silga when we were at conference a couple of weeks ago, that there was a lot of feedback that we're taking the right approach with this and going the right way about it. So, good.
Councillor Lando.
Yeah, Your Worship, as Councillor Nixon mentioned, that we had, I think, 3 presentations at Silga, including a couple sessions with lawyers. As Mr. Whitehead points out, a lot of these rules of the provincial government still trying to figure them out, and I think a point is we're on time with this. This is, the same process that many other communities are using. It's happening now. We're trying to bring this forward in a timely manner and deal with it as it comes in, but it's, it wouldn't have been the right move to do it a year ago because we don't even know what the playing field is going to look like. So I'm happy with the process going forward, and it provides the community an opportunity to come forward and let us know what their views are, and we can incorporate those and come up with a made in Revelstoke plan.
I do want to echo those points too. I did talk with a lot of how we were doing it, and they felt that we were on the right path, so they were looking at us for the model, and I think a few communities are going to be following exactly what we're doing. So I want to thank all the staff that were involved with the direction that we're going on this, and I know there's people in the public that think that all we're doing is shutting things down, but that is definitely not the case. We're being prudent with what we think is acceptable to the community, listening to the community, and there's lots of opportunities as we move forward into the next phase of how this is going to unfold. So anyways, thank you. And where are we? On the, what motion are we on? Any more comments on the motion? Motion's carried. So we are moving into 5C.
Yeah, Your Worship, I have a conflict declaration due to a business relationship with the applicant.
We are on 5C. And you have this is a development variance permit 2017-06 for Fraser Drive. And Mr. Whitehead, you have a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. A quick refresh on this one. This is a public consultation opportunity for the proposed front setback variance from 6 meters to 0.5 meters at 1911 Fraser Drive. The variance was given initial council consideration and council instructed staff to deliver notification of the proposed variance at the May 8th council meeting. The proposed variance will permit the reconstruction of the portico as part of redevelopment of the Old Canyon Motor Inn, which is now branded the Stoke Hotel. Staff have been supportive of the exterior renovations and landscaping to date and have issued a minor development permit for the works to date. No written comments have been received regarding this proposed variance. Staff are supportive of the proposed variance and see it as a substantial improvement to a highly visible location in our community.
So the question that I have, Mr. White, is this portico, is it already encroaching into this area?
Yes, Your Worship, it would be encroaching. I believe it's not quite as far. We were on site with the owner. It's roughly around this middle beam, maybe a little further out here.
Thank you. Motion? Councilor Duke?
Forward, Your Worship, the development variance permit DBP 2017-06 be approved.
Motion by Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. And would you mind, well, let's do item E, since we have a councillor in purgatory with a conflict, and he has a conflict on E as well. Does that mess you up with the presentation?
No, I got it.
Thank you.
This is Golduck Road?
Yep. So we're talking about development variance permit 2018-01, 1867 Colbeck Road.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a public consultation opportunity for 3 proposed variances at 1911 Fraser Drive. The variance proposal was given initial council consideration, and council instructed staff to deliver notification of the proposed variances at the May 8th council meeting. There's this site, a large property on Colbeck. And here's a drawing. This is the proposed addition here. The proposed variances include allowing the height of the garage to exceed the height of the house, allowing the garage to be located in front of the dwelling, and to increase the height of the garage from 4 meters to 4.9 meters. The technical definition in the zoning bylaw for height on a flat roof is to the top of the walls, so there's additional height taking into account the rafters over and above that 4.9 meters. The proposal will permit a 20 by 34 foot addition with a 16-foot wall on the existing structure. This is existing here. Staff are supportive of the proposal. No written comments have been received regarding the proposed variance.
I will bring forward the development variance permit DBP 2018-01 be approved.
Motion by Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor Nixon. Question I have, Mr. Whitehead. So the main house it's a 2-story house, but it's because it's built into the bank. 1 story is below ground and 1 story is above. If it was 2-story above ground, there wouldn't be a variance needed. Is that the way I'm reading this?
One of those 3, Your Worship, would not be required. They're still increasing the total height of the garage from 4 meters to 4.9. 4 is the max. I would hazard a guess the house is probably in the range of, it must be just under 4.9, 4.5, something like that.
On the floor that's above the ground.
Yeah.
But if it was 2-story on a grade, 2 stories, that variance wouldn't be required.
The one of the 3, you'd still require a variance to the maximum height of the accessory building, and you'd still require the variance to allow it in front of the building.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Comments or questions from council? Motion on the floor. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Would you mind letting my counselor in, Mr. Whitehead? Counselor, we're on item D, and since you were out of the room, we did item E already, so we're going to go D and then F.
Okay.
And I'm looking for a presentation, Mr. Whitehead. This is development permit 2017-07 for 113 7th Street East.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a public consultation opportunity for the proposed variances which are embedded within heritage alteration permit for 113 7th Street East for the construction of a 2-story accessory building. There's the proposal. The heritage alteration permit was given initial council consideration and where council instructed staff to deliver notification of the proposed variances at the May 8th council meeting. The variances embedded within the heritage alteration permit include an increase to the number of stories permitted for an accessory building from 1 story to 2 stories, an increase of the maximum total combined floor area of accessory buildings from 80 square meters, 864 square feet, to 103.3 square meters, 1,111 square feet. And a variance to reduce the minimum setback for an accessory structure from the lane, reducing it from 1.2 meters to 0.91 meters. The structure has a 770 square foot footprint. The total floor area, as stated in the variance, is just over 1,100 square feet. It's a 2-story structure pushed back from the road, containing a double garage, additional storage, a washroom, and a 2nd-story office area with a small balcony. Staff are not supportive of the proposal at the May 8th council meeting. 6 written comments in support and 1 written comment against the proposal have been received by staff.
Does that include the one letter of support that came into this agenda? Because where's one came in today, wasn't it? Yeah. I was curious if it was part of that.
Yes, Your Worship.
Anybody prepared to make a motion? Councillor Duke.
Thank you. That heritage alteration permit HAP 2017-07 be approved.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Orlando.
As stated at the previous meeting, just a quick summary, I will not support this application. To sum it up, I think the proponent could have worked with staff to come up with something that was more acceptable to them and acceptable according to our heritage bylaws, essentially something a little bit smaller. It sums it up.
I will support that because I think that what we have now will be greatly improved by what is proposed. And I agree with the comments, the public comments that were in favor that it's good that this is enhancing the community. So I'm quite prepared to agree with this.
Any other comments or questions, Councillor Sauls?
Your Worship, I too will support this going forward. I think this is a great addition to that neighborhood. This proponent has put some incredible thought into doing what he can to make this as close as possible to what our rules are. So I think going forward it's going to be a great addition for that neighborhood.
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
Just one extra comment. I mean, the front of the house is still within, and the proponent has done a good job in bringing it So I think it doesn't affect the whole area. So again, I'm in favor of it.
Well, I think it does change the look. I think it enhances the look, and I think it also is, and I'm hopeful that it's going to give some incentive to the owner to carry on with the look of the garage and office space that'll up update and upgrade the house. It didn't register high on the heritage list, but I think that we have to look at, what I look at, wholeheartedly support, and we're talking just about every meeting. We're talking about affordable housing and how we talked about it earlier with the presentation on employee housing with the resort. So I think that there is going to be some big advantages here, and they outweigh the disadvantages. So I'm fully in support of this. Any other comments or questions? Motion is on the floor. All those in favor? Against? Councillor Orlando voted against. Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. And we're moving into Heritage Alteration Permit 2018-01, 410 5th Street, and you have a presentation on that.
That's my computer thing.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a public consultation opportunity for the proposed variances which are embedded within Heritage Alteration Permit for 410 5th Street East for the construction of a one-story, approximately 500 square foot accessory building. Pull up a rendering here. The Heritage Alteration Permit was given initial council consideration and council instructed staff to deliver notification of the proposed variances at the May 8th council meeting. The variances embedded within the Heritage Alteration Permit include two. One, to locate the accessory building partially in front of a principal building, and to reduce the minimum side yard setback from 1 meter to 0.9 meters, to allow the structure to fit on the existing foundation of the existing building. The proposal is to replace the two-vehicle carport with a single-vehicle garage with some workspace at the rear. Staff are supportive of the proposed development. No written comments have been received with respect to this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead.
I'll bring forward the Heritage Alteration Permit HAP 2018-01 be approved.
Motion by Councillor Duke, second by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. We're into item 8A. Aren't we?
I'll bring that forward. Sure. Yeah. I move that the after-tax low-income measure, instead of the current before-tax low-income cutoff, be used to determine eligibility for the City of Revelstoke program.
Motion by Councillor Lyon, second by Councillor Sauls. Discussion on the motion.
Your Worship has discussed at the committee as a whole. This is a small change to how those with low incomes, how the determination on who qualifies for a subsidy to their passes. The report notes that this program has been trialed in place and it was a success, and we're moving forward with making to make an improvement.
Any other comments or questions? Motion is on the floor. All those in favor? Carried. We are into 9A. Anybody like to bring that forward? Councillor English?
Yeah, happy to bring that forward, Your Worship. Thank you. 9A, that Municipal Ticket Information Systems Bylaw number 2225 be adopted.
Motion by Councillor English, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. And election. Who'd like to bring that forward?
Your Worship, I'll bring forward the election and assent voting procedures bylaw number 2221 be read a first, second, and third time.
Motion by Councillor Sauls, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Sauls, you made the motion.
Your worship, this is just bringing up modern-day techniques for elections, where electronic voting and size and placement of election signs. A little disappointed that Ms. Lowe won't allow me a 4x8 sheet of plywood all over town, but other than that, I think I can live with it.
I don't see why she wouldn't.
Your worship?
Yes.
Your worship, could I ask the Director of Corporate Admin to provide an overview of this bylaw? Because I think the changes it implies for local elections and referendum voting are relatively significant. And I was just having a late thought, thinking about there is a statutory time frame in which a bylaw such as this has to be adopted prior to an election in order to be effective. I think we've got a little bit of time. Might want to consider some notification out to the broader community, invite comment with respect to the comments of this bylaw as well, because not only does it introduce electronic voting to local elections, it proposes voting day only registration, the end of a voting list, requiring electors to bring identification, 2 pieces that proves their identity, one with a picture and their place of residence, whereas with a voting book you still had to bring ID, but it wasn't as extensive. And the regulation of the number of election signs and their size is quite a change from ones where candidates with perhaps deeper pockets could litter the community with election signage and get more name recognition and perhaps more votes.
Ms. Lowe, you have the floor.
Yeah, Mr. Chateau pretty much highlighted all the three big changes. I did work with the election administration from LVMA and municipal affairs and housing ministry to create the bylaw. I used other municipalities to create structure for the regulations for the signage. Mostly the signage came forward because of complaints we received at the last local government election. There was citizens complaining about the clutter and how long the signs stayed up, which is what made us look at the regulation. A lot of municipalities in our area have regulations, so I kind of went in the middle. I didn't go really big or really little. I just kept it in the middle for signage to standardize what these people said with respect to keeping things pretty much equal for the candidates. The electronic voting, automated voting system will definitely be an upgrade. I will have election results within an hour, because it's 7 or 8 hours later. And that's being conservative. I could have them within 20 minutes. It'll make things a lot easier for us. And the count or recount, it's almost instantaneous to recount, so that makes things a lot simpler as well. It reduces the amount of people looking at an election from 50 to 20. So the costs are actually pretty much equal to the election. So it's not an increase in cost. And election day voting, we went this way just because the EP voters list always required a lot of review, and it took a lot of staff time to go through and update, and it was never really accurate. So this way, who you are, who's figuring, pretty exciting. We intend on doing a large media coverage on this with respect to allowing the citizens to understand what they need to bring to the election. So we'll get that out on the council for the bylaw.
Councillor Nixon.
So will there be a bit of education for seniors on I think this is a big change for seniors showing up to vote about the electronic voting, what it'll look like, how to use it?
Yes, absolutely, and staff will be trained. It's actually simpler. So it's just a matter, you still have to fill out your oval. You'll get your slip, you go and fill out your oval in your privacy section, and then you just slide it into the machine, and there'll be somebody there. There has to be security at the machine at all times, so there's somebody that will help them. And then when we do go to the other opportunities for voting, when we go to the hospital and to Mulberry Manor, we will have somebody trained, and they don't actually have to use that. We feed the forms in after.
Okay.
Councillor Brothers.
Just a question. I think you mentioned that we now will require 2 pieces of ID, one of which is a photo ID. Does that raise any issues, especially with respect to seniors who may not have photo ID? And that's a concern to me. First of all, teaching people about the need to bring this information, and then are we going to have a problem where some seniors just won't have photo ID because they don't have driver's license and that type of thing?
Yeah.
Mr. Chabot.
Your Worship, with respect to that question, I brought in voting day only registration in Prince George in 1996, and it had 46,000 eligible electors there. I had a total of one complaint on general voting day, and that was a person who showed up without a second piece of ID. It wasn't about, I don't have photo ID that proves my identity. That person, I personally offered to go pick them up at their home and take them back to the voting place to vote. I did want to comment on voting day only registration being a change, because the only opposition I received to it was from members of council, and as Ms. Lowe notes, there are sometimes errors in the provincial list of electors. There's sometimes requests to secure privacy by obscuring residential address of voters. My response to that, and after the first year, it was candidates and council members who were concerned about the loss of this thing, which they viewed as a tool. And I said, it's an alpha list of names. Take a phone book. What's the difference? Now, the phone book's going to have some people that live in the rural area, but in large part for a community, it'll be most resident in the city, right? Not really usable. It used to be a tool that scrutineers could watch who had come in and voted, and then you'd know that your candidate's supporters had made it in. You didn't need to have other people phone them to say, come and vote. That really doesn't happen in local elections, and not that much anymore in the other types of elections as well. The primary advantage of the electronic voting as well that I found was that the number of ballots rejected went from, in a larger community, several hundred because of voter error, down to very, very few, like less than 10, where people wanted to deliberately spoil a ballot. So if I were to put, you'll have the votes for all of the elections that are on for city resident electors. I'll get a ballot card that'll include the ballot for mayor, for councillor, and for school trustee. And what happens when there's a lot of candidates for particularly, say, council, where you get to select up to 7, people inadvertently mark 8. And you bring it to an electronic voting machine, it'll push it back at you and tell you that the councillor's race has been overvoted. Do you want a replacement ballot? In most cases, the elector is going to say, yes, I do. In some cases, they're going to say, no, they intended to spoil their ballot. In which case, you can hit an override button. That ballot will go into the machine and into the ballot box that collects the voted ballots, and it'll record any valid marks on that ballot. So that's a real advantage, but it'll tell an elector as well if you've undervoted. And a lot of times undervoting, when you can vote for 7 members of council but you only want to vote for 4, is intentional. So they're going to get asked, well, you undervoted. And for some seniors that might be, oh, gee, I didn't realize I could select 2 more. They may want to remark their ballot, in which case they can get a replacement and do that.
Councillor Sauls.
Your Worship, my only question is to Ms. Lowe regarding the identification process, because in my business I do see seniors without photo ID. The medical services card may be just numbers. We're seeing less and less of that. They may have their birth certificate, that sort of thing. Is there an option for them to still be able to vote?
Yes, there is. There's a declaration that they can put. And who they are. So there is options.
Motions on the floor for election and Senate voting procedure bylaw 2221. Is there any other comments or questions? Councillor Lando.
Your Worship, I wanted to clarify a point. One of the new regulations is that election signs must be 2 feet by 2 feet. And for clarity, this is not election signs that are placed on public property. These are election signs that are placed on private property as well. So if somebody wanted to support their candidate and put a sign on their lawn, they would be required to limit it to 2 feet by 2 feet. Okay, and this is within our jurisdiction to do what about that if someone decides they want to make a larger sign? So is it the city's intent to go onto property and rip a sign out and tell them they can't do it?
Well, we'll start with compliance and education, and do a lot of policy and
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about this being brought forward for first, second, and third readings. There's a lot to process here. Some of my concerns are like the nature of the electronic voting system. I don't really have a lot of details on what that is going to be and how that is going to work. It's not presented in here. Secondly, there's restrictions on where people can place signs. It puts a limit of 6 signs on public property, and it also has a requirement that be approved with the city or a map be submitted with the city. I think when you get down to especially details like telling people that they're not allowed to, on their private property, support their candidate in a certain way, that the people are going to have a lot of issue with that. There was new information received just now from Mr. Chabot regarding statutory requirements, so that's a cause for further concern. I think we're potentially, this could be something that everyone puts their hands up and says nothing, and nothing happens of it, and then a few months down the road before the election, we're going to get into a bit of a hornet's nest on this. My feeling is that this should be slowed down and to take a look at it, and I would actually like to ask Mr. Chabot to elaborate on his comments regarding statutory requirements. So what would that look like?
I think there's a distinction in the Act between a bylaw to amend voting procedures, the number of days it needs to be adopted in front of a general local election, and there's a different time period in the number of days it needs to be adopted before a by-election held under the Act. And I think we've got until the 1st of July to adopt this bylaw that will be applicable to the next general local election. Is that right? Last meeting in June. So if council wanted to invite some input, because that's why I brought this up and wanted to highlight, because it seemed like we might breeze over this and then head into an election proposing some fairly significant changes to the way elections are conducted, and people might say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't know about that. So if council wanted to amend the resolution, they could I guess, move an amendment that the third reading be removed from the motion that's on the floor and council vote on first and second reading, that we publish some notice and bring back any comments for the first meeting in June. And that report, and I guess the notice and some information on the website could provide a demonstration of how electronic voting works, because it's really straightforward and simple, but people are apprehensive, and nobody wants to disenfranchise anyone from their vote. I know in Prince George I did a series of newspaper articles served by more than one newspaper, video interview on Shaw Cable that played for months leading up to the election, just because it could become a mess if you don't cover it well. I think Ms. Lowe has stated to council that her intention was to make known fairly widely the changes, but if council wants some additional input, although we've got 3 weeks till the next regular meeting, so that could be done.
Yeah, and we also have a instruction video that will publish on the website.
Showing voting, yeah.
Do I hear a proposed amendment?
Yes, Your Worship, if it's acceptable to...
Same motion,
I think the same motion,
third reading.
Strike the third reading, and is the requirement, do we need in the motion that a public outreach on this matter be conducted, or?
Staff knows what council's intention is, I guess, okay, so thinking it through, if there's going, council will have to consider third reading at the first meeting in June. And if there are amendments proposed to this, then it'll have to be moved and seconded to be read a third time, then moved that it be amended at third reading, voted on, because there has to be a clear day between third reading and adoption.
So the amendment is just for to drop third reading, or
Right now it is,
we're
yeah.
not going to worry about this this outreach program that
Staff know what council is
So
expecting. and this
we have
will
an
have to come
amendment
back on
to
June.
drop third reading on this motion. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Nixon. Speaking only to the amendment, is there any comments or questions on the amendment only? Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, I support this amendment going forward, just to slow things down just a little bit, to make sure we're communicating with the community and to make sure that we're getting it right. And I think it's the right way to go.
Do you have your hand up for a comment? Was there anybody else? Councillor
Yes, Your Worship. I agree. It's a great opportunity. It's wise, it's prudent to consult the community, especially given the timing. Those of us choosing to continue on with council will be incumbents, and I think, especially in the sign part of it, for example, it restricts people's ability to, get their name out there, get their word out there, and I think that could be perceived as council voting themselves at this juncture an unfair advantage, and I think the repercussions of that are very real. So we should slow it down. And secondly, for myself, I do have issues with a few of the points in there. I think, as I mentioned earlier, telling people how big their sign can be on their property, I think is an issue, and also under federal and provincial rules, and I don't have the legal background for this one, there are allowances. Sign bylaws can't be enforced. That's why you see during the federal and provincial elections signs all over the place. I realize that this is our bylaw, but I would like some further clarity on that. And furthermore, I'm all for electronic voting if it's a better system, but I don't have information presented before me as to exactly what kind of system we're going to be using. Is this like a ballot counter, or is this an internet-based system? All that kind of stuff. I think the public would benefit from knowing from. I would benefit from knowing from as well.
Mr. Chabot.
Your Worship, so in the staff report that comes back to council, staff can report on the regulation of election signs in other communities. Some have taken, I understand, a much harder line and said you get to have one on public property. Restriction on size, fair enough. I mean, we're not prohibiting signage. We're saying there are regulations around its use, so it's not prohibiting free speech. And if we were to allow people to get into unlimited sign sizes, sooner or later you come into requirements for those signs to be engineered and designed such that they don't fall on your neighbor's house or his cat or whatever. The staff can provide the link to a demonstration of electronic voting. These really are, in our view, these things being brought forward by staff are improvements to election and voting procedures. They're modernization, and they make it more accessible and easier. You don't need to make sure you're on the list or fill some onerous form out. The requirement of signing a voting book for voting day only registration is about the same as signing a voting book for use of a voter's list.
Well, I don't have a dog in this upcoming fight, but I think that sometimes we get a little bit officious on this thing, and I'm concerned about the regulations on the signage. The election, everybody knows that, there's a pile of election signs, thank God it's over in another 2 weeks and they'll all disappear. That's exactly what happens. They all disappear. People know that it's coming to an end. I don't know. I think that we're being too officious and restrictive, and I'm a little bit concerned about if you're going to have everybody with a cookie cutter sign, and I think there should be a little bit of individualism allowed. So I'm going to vote in favor of the amendment, and we're going to move on because, like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight, so we don't need to drag this thing out too long. So the vote is on the amendment. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now we go to the amended motion, which is first and second reading. I think we beat it up enough. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
So, Your Worship, before we move over to staff reports, I regrettably have to do an airport run with my partner. She's at flight 8, so I'm taking her.
Okay. Well, we're going to expect you to know everything there is to know about Mountain Caribou when you get back.
I'm going to get my test.
We're on to 11A, which is Economic Development and Mountain Caribou Update. And Ms. Quico, you have a presentation for us.
I do, thank you. Through your worship, we actually have a guest here to speak today, Rob Soroya, who works with the Provincial Caribou Recovery Program. We brought him here today because there's some changes that are coming up that I think it's really important that Council and the community is aware of. On May 4th, 2018, by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, that there is an imminent threat on Mountain Caribou. And so they specifically identified 10 local populations of less than 100 that they were focusing on, and they have determined that they are going to be putting in some form of action in terms of dealing with that threat. In order for the BC herds to be recovered, it isn't yet clear what either the federal government or the provincial government are going to mandate or suggest we can do. There are a variety of different tools that can be used in terms of working to make sure that the caribou remain, the population remain stable, or that they are active in the threat. So I'm going to let Rob take over and talk a little bit more about that.
I can just talk. I don't It's fun looking at the pictures on the wall because I've worked with quite a few back to Jeff on this caribou issue. It's been going on for decades. I think I was on a committee with Your Worship 15 years ago, and the city had its own committee for caribou. It was such an important issue back then that the city formed its own caribou recovery committee. And the history goes back decades, even back to 1987, when the NDP government actively campaigned on increasing protected areas from 6 to 12%. And that had a whole bunch of trickle-down effects, which spurred along the boundary land use plan. And that also created a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people because it had the potential to constrain business to a large degree. So that spurred the creation of recovery committees. And Revelstoke created its own recovery committee outside of the provincial land use planning process. Does this thing work? Oh, it does. Yeah. So I'm gonna try and be quick. I think you said half an hour, but maybe quicker than that. So I'll try and be very quick. So a summary of provincial recovery activities, but I'm going to try and focus on some positive spins. For example, are there any win-wins in caribou recovery? And the short answer is not that many, but there are some. And of course, the long answer is that if we don't have any win-wins, the federal hand, the big fist of the federal government is going to continue coming down and continue to constrain activity. So it behooves us all, I think anyway, this is not a scientific statement, but a value statement, to come along and find solutions, or else it's going to constrain everything we know about Revelstoke, many, many aspects of Revelstoke. And that's basically my job. I'm a scientist. I work out of the University of Alberta, but our whole theme is from science to policy. So we work with all the major oil companies in the oil sands. They give us money, we provide solutions to them, and we do the same in BC with the governments and every level of government and the forest sector. And the reason this is such a big deal, if you look at woodland caribou here, their critical habitat overlaps billions of dollars of oil. So about 2/3 of my time is spent working in this country here. So it's literally their habitat overlaps with billions of dollars of oil and hundreds of millions of timber. And right here in Revelstoke, it's the timber factor, it's forestry, as well as heli skiing and every other industry we know. And Nicole was referring to the federal, this is right off the federal website. I just grabbed this a few minutes ago. These are the ranges that are in the imminent threat category. this is left out right now, the core of Revelstoke. However, there's still lots of people employed in Revelstoke here and here, but the core is left out. And something to keep in mind while we're looking at this is that we have to ask ourselves why this is left out. And to a certain degree, it's because some of the innovative solutions that have been applied here are working a little bit. So there's a couple of glimmers of hope here and up further north off this map. The rest of the story is pretty sad. So I'll give I basically covered part one, a brief history of land use planning, some science and some solutions. So I went over this already. Even without the caribou constraints, there was a 17% reduction in cut predicted for Revelstoke, not even including the impending caribou constraints from these processes. So Kootenay Boundary Land Use Plan came along, and then there was uncertainty, so Revelstoke formed its own land use plan separate from all the provincial ones, the MAC plan, the Minister's Advisory Committee. Group of specialists, these were the technical folks. Dr. McClellan, he was my PhD supervisor. He still works for the Ministry of Forests, or whatever they're called now, Monroe. And then there was a social science trade-off committee. The mayor sat on the committee at the time, Jeff did, and many of these names will be familiar to you. And here's the reason that caribou are in conflict with a lot of industry. It's because in the Purcells and in Prince George, they stay up high most of the year. And they've protected 99% of the telemetry locations for these herds down south and up north. But here, they spend a third of the year at low elevation. So that means right on top of the cedar hemlock forests that are worth a lot of money. So it creates a lot of conflict. This is what they eat: arboreal lichens on old growth trees. The one thing caribou have going for them is that they're easy to count because they live on mountaintops late in winter, so they're really easy to enumerate and count. I'll skip over this stuff. So land use planning, this is what came about in the mid-90s through the MAC plan, the Minister's Advisory Committee. No harvest up high. In the high elevation forest, it was 30% had to be old growth, and then down low it was 40% had to be old growth. And that's of the timber harvest land base. That's forests that would otherwise be logged. If you look at a map, this is close to Mica. This is the Big Mouth Valley here. And this is caribou habitat in the dark blue. The light blue is the potentially loggable forest. It's the timber harvest land base. There's trees here, there's trees here, there's trees here. It's just on steep land that you can't log. And this was protected as part of the 1990s process. We spatialized the retention, we mapped it out, and then in the mid-2000s, another round of habitat protection came, another 10,000 hectares. And then the light green is what's left for harvesting. So the double message here is it's been heavily logged, for sure, nobody debates that, but most of what's left is protected for caribou. And my prediction is with this federal piece that's coming again, it's coming back. The land use planning is going to, it's been quiet for a decade, now it's all coming back. My prediction is that there will be another layer, more red and orange added to the green. That's what I think the provincial government is going to do to stave off the stop work clause, these Section 80s that are coming down. This is just another way of looking at the same thing. This is from Revelstoke to Mica. The purple is the core critical caribou habitat, and the little orange is what's protected. All the numbers are summarized in these tables. I've got it all here. It's a very short report if you folks want it. It's all summarized in the back retention numbers. I can give it to Nicole to circulate. Of course, there's another myriad of activities. Heli-skiing, snowmobiling, recreation. So these are the heli-ski closures from Revelstoke to Mica. Everything in red is closed during winter. I think it's December 15th to April 15th. So, if caribou disappear, all this gets opened up again. So it's something most Canadians would like to have and continue on. It would open up again at the provincial level, but then the federal arm would come back in reverse and push back against any attempts to eliminate restrictions. Okay, some science. So that's the policy piece so far. If there's any questions.
Just one question. Are we talking only about logging and the forest industry, or are we also talking about the recreational industry and limiting that?
I believe the way I understand the federal language is the federal safety net is to constrain all commercial recreation, even non-commercial recreation, and harvesting. So according to the letter of the law, it could be everything. But when you actually read that order that I showed on the screen with those 10 herds, the language itself isn't that strong. Things get worse. But it's there, and many people are worried. Again, two-thirds of the work I do is in Alberta now, and it's everything these folks are doing, like the oil industry there is dedicated. They're calling it a bigger issue. I call it North America's biggest conservation challenge, because you have a species that's naturally rare, but that covers such a huge area. There's nothing else that comes close in North America. So this is caribou around the world. I showed this woodland caribou are in green, or in the purple and pink. There used to be white-tailed deer, and by more of these guys, and it's a combination of food for these guys. So these guys are more violent than they used to be. And this is being shown across North America. It's not just us here. UBC is all over North America. Same story. So the really important question is, how do you recover these guys? That's what we really want to know. If you only protect the habitat, in other words, if you only protect the flesh, a long time for recovery because of this legacy, these shrubs. So if you only focus on habitat, there will still be deer and moose that well, that's a short-term solution. That's a band-aid, because the money come back, and that's been shown time and again. And it's very difficult to do this unless you show levers being used. So, continues on very long if it's only based on predator control. So another approach is in between the two, reducing your invading prey and seeing what happens to caribou. That's a big part of what's been done in Revelstoke. And then on top of the science, of course, you have the values. You have Miley Cyrus saying don't kill wolves. You have folks here saying only protect habitat. These are big problems that invoke values from different demographics across North America. This is a term, if you walk into an MLA's office, when I showed this presentation to the NDP MLA in Victoria and to the NDP MLAs and the Green Party and the Independent, they all know what this means now, because I see them at conferences, and if lambda is 1, your population is stable. Everybody in Alberta knows this too. So you can walk into an office and say, what's the lambda for that herd? You want to know. If it's 1.05, it's growing at 5% a year, and if it's 0.95, it's declining. These are the values, the lambda values across Western Canada. It's not very optimistic, that's for sure. A couple northern ones are stable or increasing, most are declining. I'll update some of these, but this is the picture for Western North America. What has been going on in Western North America is now, in the last 10 years, a huge amount of active recovery measures on top of that habitat. So, there are areas where wolves are being reduced. There are areas where wolves are being reduced. This is right here. So, how many folks... It's also controversial, but not as controversial as reducing wolves. There have been transplants over here to Nelson. When wolves were reduced in Alberta, this is a 10-year program, 841 wolves, right there in the Little Smoky. Lambda increased, but only by 4 units. When it was expanded to here, in the Alapèche herd, it actually worked a little better. In Revelstoke, the moose reduction led to stability. So it's one of the more stable herds out of 65 herds in Western Canada. Right here, the Columbia North herd has been stable since 2004. So that's what I mean by a glimmer of hope. It's not a solution. But that's the main reason it's stabilized is because of the moose reduction. And in other areas, the moose reduction didn't work as well. Transplants were tried down in Nelson. 20 caribou were transplanted. They all died within a year. Unfortunately, they didn't look at their cougar numbers before they transplanted. So this was the peak of cougar numbers. So yeah, it was a mistake. So what do we conclude from this mess? If you're gonna do one of these treatments, it has to be intense. It can't be a half measure. There are glimmers of hope, and there's one more I want to talk about. I'm going to skip over all this. Skip some data. This is just details on the moose reduction here in Wells Gray. This was our control here in Revelstoke. We harvested a lot of moose. Moose came down, wolf numbers came down, caribou survival increased. It didn't affect recruitment. The big thing is that, like I said, this herd stabilized, lambda above 1 barely, whereas the reference herds declined. These two herds were very small to begin with. Columbia South, right in Mount Rev Park, they continued to decline. But the real question is how to go from stable to increasing. I'm going to skip over this, folks. Another project that's been attempted in Revelstoke, I'm sure everyone's heard about this one. It's up the bend, the maternal penning project. Putting pregnant caribou, they have their calves. Huge support. It's a win-win in the sense of social support. So First Nations, I've been doing land use planning for 20 years, almost 20 years, 18 years. And you're in a room, in 1995 in the community center, there were 400 foresters yelling at the four guys at the front, at Bruce McClellan, and it was a contentious place. This thing has brought everyone together. The jury is out as to whether it's actually working for caribou. It's still in the pilot phase. But up north, my colleague, Scott McNaid, is a similar 10-year nested within a wolf control treatment. And here the population has doubled. It's increased from 32 to over 70 in 4 years, so lambda's gone up to 15% growth a year. And there are a couple of other herds that are also increasing with some of the wolf management. The take home here is that one measure on its own won't work. You got to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. The habitat protection, some wolf management in measured amounts, and it just began here in Revelstoke. The big stability here was caused by the moose reduction, but in the last 18 months, some wolf removals have begun, and we're seeing an increase in adult survival as a result of this. Okay, so some solutions. Again, I basically just mentioned all this. You have to go hard. There are a couple of glimmers of hope. The one up north, the Clinziza herd, the lambda is at 1.15, and two levers are better than one. A lot of our science and policy stuff is on our website at the U of A, the Caribou Monitoring Unit. I think Nicole has circulated it. Yeah, or will. Yeah. So, come have a look at it. A lot of the stuff, you can ignore all the Alberta stuff, but a lot of the BC stuff is there. And yeah, that's about all I'll say for now. And I'm happy to take questions.
Councilor Brothers.
One question. So what you're saying is that the province has to come up with some reasonable solution on maintaining or improving the caribou situation. Otherwise, the feds are going to come in and it's going to be draconian.
That captures it perfectly, yeah. And what can the city do, I guess, is a question. I don't have the answer to that, but it's, the city used to have a committee specifically on caribou, and basically it was probably there to negotiate some kind of solution.
Well, I look at all the changes that, as a community, that we made with snowmobile closures, and I know the forest industry took reductions in AAC to put areas aside, and I think they called the line of operability changed.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that there's anybody that says we don't care about caribou, we want industry. We have to look at anything that we can do to play our part in helping the caribou, and we have to play our part. So I'm just hoping that when we're sitting down with the province, that they're looking at what are the win-wins and how do we work together and how do we keep moving forward. I was reading this Vancouver Sun article the other day that, and you're quoted in this thing here, and talk about it, and you talk about some of the good things that are happening here. The amount of protection given to caribou in a working landscape is unprecedented, and it gives us a glimmer of hope. There's another fellow in here, the Jesse Zeman, and it says that if critical habitat were to cover summer and fall rains, the impact of that would be very significant. But I find Ottawa's position a bit disingenuous because the caribou inside national parks, which they are responsible for, aren't doing any better than those outside the parks.
That's exactly right, yeah. So that's because like I mentioned at the beginning, there's climate change also happening that is making it easier for white-tailed deer to come in. So there are more and more white-tailed deer because they're overwintering more easily. So there's two things going on. There's climate piece. Protected. They're not growing in protected areas, and that's what Jesse is that manages the Wildlife Federation, basically provincial hunting. And right, we've Banff about a third of the range is in the park, and most of the winter since 1994 were in the park. They have declined from 120 to 4, and that's with, significant part of their range protected. However, logging adjacent to the park makes it easier for predators to get in there, that's for sure. But yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, that speaks to the point that I made at the beginning. If we only rely on habitat, if we shut down forests totally, all of these herds will still go extinct. And the science because that's slow in the long term and not the long term. You hit the nail on the head. That's the long term, not the short term. So you got to pull those long term for sure. Term levers. It has to be simultaneous. That's the take home.
Well, when I was mayor before, it was when the whole support for wolf kill, call it what it is, you call it predator culling, whatever you want, but it was supporting and shooting wolves to reduce the population, to allow they follow the moose in and the deer and the caribou are easier to get of all kinds of reasons. I can tell you that I took a lot of abuse over supporting the wolf cull, but it seems to me that you can't have one without the other. So it's going to be a fact of their survival that there has to be some form of it.
It has to be simultaneous, yeah. And the first wolf killing happened in 2017. Before that, it was the moose reduction, which began in 2003. So again, that's kind of in between the Band-Aid versus the ultimate. And that seems to have brought down wolf numbers simply by reducing the moose. So yeah, I think that captures it well, what you said. It's simultaneous, but the thing that we forget, and we still hear this all the time, we get pushed on it all the time. Why don't you just lock up all the habitat? First of all, that's not my decision, but it's my decision to say, it's not my decision or my job, but it's my job to say, if all you do is lock up the habitat, these guys will still go extinct. Yeah. In many cases, not all, but certainly in the southern.
And I think that that's a big point that people have to realize is that it's not just let's do one thing and it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's not. Three big things. Yeah. Okay.
Any comments or questions, Councillor Orlando?
Yeah, excuse me. Rob, I was talking to the general manager at the Revelstoke Community Forest Corporation. I sit on the board there, and he was telling me an anecdotal story about 7 years ago when the Revelstoke Caribou Rearing and the Wild Project was getting underway. They were fundraising, looking for grants, money, any funding to get this initiative going. And at the time, Shell Canada had some kind of a grant available if you collected your gasoline points to go out and get their points and get the grant. So they were sitting around using scratch cards to try and get some money. So I highlight that point to point out that, that the project, which is one of many efforts, requires funding. And currently, a lot of the funding that came to get that initiative underway was scraping it together, to get the adequate level of funding. So my question is this: when you're looking at the various levers available to us, do you have an estimate on how much, where the money is bought best, and how much is required in our area to make these conservation mechanisms effective, and then if we had that money, where would we apply it?
That's a really good question. And I want to point out, first of all, I'm not speaking on behalf of our CRW. I'm not allowed to. That's not my mandate. That I'm trying to provide to them. I'm not a spokesperson for our CRW. But so we contrasted habitat restoration, so fixing 100,000 kilometers of seismic line, $10,000 a kilometer, so that's $1 billion, right? And that's the slowest and most expensive way to gain caribou. And you'll have extinction occurring as you recover because there's so much to recover. It'll take decades. The biggest bang for buck is twofold: creating safe havens, either large fences or small fences for these small populations, and then doing the predator-prey management. Reducing moose actually makes money for the province, right? Because they're selling more tags. Yeah. Now, that's in the short term. Let's call that 10 or 15 years. In the long term, there are all sorts of value-added products with keeping old growth forests out there that I can only imagine. Intrinsic values, all that kind of stuff. I can't speak very well to that. That's not my domain. But there's obviously values that are beyond economics for maintaining the forests out there. But in terms of 10 years, what to do over the next 10 years, it's those two things that I mentioned: safe havens and managing the predator-prey system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess a supplement to that would be is there any estimates? Have somebody done the costing out on how much that's going to cost? So I'm aware that, for example, in Alberta, the prey management program has been much more intensive than in BC.
The predator management.
Predator management has been much more intensive in BC than in BC. And sort of the question is, if this is being put forth the government as one of the solutions, what's the holdup? What's the barrier?
Yeah, it's always money, but of course, you're spurring me to think about maybe repeating some of that math that we did in Alberta here. I haven't done it here. It's just my instinct talking, and I know more or less within an order of magnitude, I'm in the right ballpark, but I don't know. I can't tell you how many millions are required to run a prey-predator habitat and safe haven program, but it's in the millions. Obviously, it's in the tens of millions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's going to be a lot more on this subject coming up, and I appreciate you coming and giving us a lot more science than I think a lot of us had in the first place. So thanks very much, Rob.
Yeah.
Before we have motions here.
Before the motion, Your Worship, Part 1, that the report prepared by the Director of Community Economic Development terribly be received for information. Part 2, that a draft commission for provincial care and recovery prepared for review by
Brother Secretary. Before we move into item B, I just wanted to back up, and I unfortunately I'm scratching on my notes, and I missed out on announcements from the mayor, and I wanted to briefly touch on what's happening with the Southside Sewer Lagoon, and the residents that are living in the neighborhood. It's not acceptable. We wanted to reassure the community that what happened is not a result of somebody asleep at the switch, not doing their job. It's an event that does happen in these kinds of systems where we get a heat wave in and the system turns over. Immediately when the system started changing, staff went into high gear and started doing a whole bunch of things to rectify the problem. And I'm not technical enough to tell you all the things that were being done, but putting in more air and putting in a special type of fertilizer and doing all kinds of things to the lagoon to save itself and get back. We recognize that there is still work to be done on the lagoon, and council has put $200,000 in the 2018 budget to look at other mitigation activities. I just don't want anybody to think that happens, trying to find out what the proper fix is, and I don't think that anybody on council is concerned about the money because the problem is a lot bigger. The real question is how much money we flow without knowing what the exact answer is first. And I don't think anybody would be in favor of, let's just spend the $200,000 and hope that it works. That's not good enough. So I just want to reassure the community. I know that a lot of people are upset because it's happened before, and I feel for those people. And but it is definitely not, let's point fingers at one or two people and that's who's going to take the blame. Oh, wait, I'm taking the blame right now, but that's okay. But again, it's not a situation that that anybody is happy with. The residents, staff, council, and I just want people to know that we are working more than full-time on trying to get this problem rectified. We are on item 11B.
Your Worship, I'll bring forward from the Health Committee recommendation, air quality monitor, that the recommendation from the Health Advisory Committee regarding a letter be written to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy requesting an air quality monitoring station in Revelstoke be approved.
Motion by Councillor Nixon, second by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, we brought this forward at the Health Advisory Committee to ask again for air quality in Revelstoke to be monitored, and in response to the forest fires last year and our pattern of inversion. And Revelstoke has a history of 25 years of recording air quality and having that data, and then it stopped. I don't think it should be managed by emergency staff, but I think it should be managed by public health staff, whether that's interior health staff or city staff can be figured out later. But I think it's important that we know what kind of air quality we have in this town.
Thank you. Comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. We're on 11C, and this is to do with development variance permit 2018-02, 417 2nd Street East, and you have a presentation for us, Mr. Whitehead.
Yes, Your Worship. Is Ron? What's the gentleman's name? Rob.
Oh, that's not the one.
Oh, sorry. That's for the mouse, isn't it?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a new development variance permit application located at 417 2nd Street East. It is a tiny old 25 by 100 foot lot just near the intersection of 2nd and Victoria. The proposed variances are to permit the construction of a single family dwelling with a secondary suite. Looking for there's a sketch here of the front or the rear of the building, and this is the side view here. The proposed variances are to reduce the side yard setback from 1.5 to 1.2 meters on the north side and 1.5 to 1 meter on the south side. This will permit the construction of a skinny house as shown here. The proposed dwelling is rectangular in shape due to the nature of the lot size. It will meet the minimum parking requirements for a lot of this size, which is 1 stall for the dwelling and 1 stall for the suite. It is part of mitigation for the development. Driveways and walkways will be heated to reduce the need for snow storage on site, as well as the roof will contain snow stops to keep snow from falling onto that limited space on the sides of the property. Stormwater will also be collected. The roof gutters and roof leaders will be tied into a rock pit for drainage to minimize runoff to neighboring properties. Staff are supportive of this innovative infill proposal. There are a few examples around town of a similar size and style of building. A resolution today will accept the application and direct staff to undertake public notification.
Motion? Councillor Sills.
Your Worship, I'll bring forward the development variance permit application number DVP 2018-02 from Christian Farrell be approved, and council give notice of their intention to consider the issuance of development variance permit number DVT 2018-02 for 417 2nd Street East to vary the following provisions from zoning bylaw number 1264. Section 736C to reduce the required minimum side yard setbacks from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters on the north side and from 1.5 meters to 1 meter on the south side.
Motion by Councillor Sills, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Mr. White, is skinny house, is that like an official planning term?
Sure.
That's something you picked up from Peter Bernanke.
No, we've heard of skinny houses before. There's a few in Prince George, there's a few around here. Many communities with the old, there's more commonly a 33-foot by 100-foot lot. Ours are often 25 by 100.
So what 1.2 meter, 1.5, so 0.3 of a meter, so it's like...
1.2 is basically 4 feet, so you're going from 5 feet to 4 feet.
Yeah, okay.
And then your 1 meter is 3 foot and a third.
Not as critical on that side, on the south side.
It was to make space for a walkway, I believe, to get to the side entrance to the secondary suite.
Comments or questions on the motion? Councillor Brothers?
I think that this is just a great creative way to get an infill. We need housing, so I'm going to support this because I think it's a good idea.
Any other comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. We're on to 11D.
All grateful for that.
Hang on.
No, we discussed it with staff earlier. It's okay.
You're okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
That the 2018 Resort Municipality Initiative funding recommendations in the amount of $291,000 as recommended by the Tourism Infrastructure Committee be approved.
Motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. I think it shows how important the resort municipality infrastructure and designation is to the community, and I would encourage council to keep letting every MLA know that they see how important and what a big impact it has on this community and other resort communities. We are on item E.
Your Worship, I'll bring that forward. That the tender for Phase 2 works for the Big Eddy water upgrades be awarded to General Assembly with a tender price of $1,629,584.51, excluding GST.
Motion by Councillor Sauls, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Sauls.
Worship, this is just continuing that Big Eddy water project, doing the Phase 2, trying to get this complete.
Yep, good news. Any other comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Oh, Mike?
Your Worship, I just point out that the costs are still going up on construction projects. I think we were fortunate to receive 5 bids on this. The the three lowest bids were basically within 6% of the low bid, so that shows that the low bid was competitive, and I think our pre-tender estimate was about $50,000 below this. We are going to have to work pretty hard to work out what else we're going to do with the remaining funds after we do this, and so we will be bringing forward some recommendations to council for the remainder of the works, and that will include things like building a new reservoir and repairing the existing reservoir up there, as well as potentially some more pipe work. But there is going to be work that's not going to get completed under this project that we were hoping to when we started it. And I think that's predominantly because the cost of construction has gone up somewhere between 20 and 30% since we started.
So I can't remember the figure that's in the dollar-wise that's left after this is done for phase 3. Was it like 780,000? I can't remember.
Your Worship, it's I'd have to check exactly, but I believe it's coming close to $800,000 or $900,000. But even with this, we still need to pay for the construction supervision for the engineer. So this is just for the contractor. The other part about construction projects with the type of contract that we enter into, we specify the tender amount, but without a change order, you can still have plus or minus 15% on material. So you could end up with 15% more roadworks required just because the road crumbles around the project, and the contractor can legitimately claim that extra amount under the contract, just the way that the contract structured. So we've got a bit of a contingency at the moment, but as we move closer to the end of the project, it's going to start getting tighter.
Well, I think the part of the answering what I'm leading up to the question is that is there an opportunity for us to be fast tracking the final phase and putting it out and doing it this year?
Your Worship, we're working on that right now.
I think of the questions you're already doing them. It's unbelievable. I have a few other things I'm thinking about, Mike, so you can start working on those. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but you can start working on them. We have a motion on the floor. Is there any other comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Nice to see this project going forward like this. Thank you. We are in item F.
Your Worship, I'll bring forward that the city's 2018-2022 financial plan be amended to include the 2017 capital budget carry forward projects identified in Appendix A and attached to the report entitled 2017 Capital Budget Carry Forward Request from the Director of Finance dated May 10th, 2018.
Motion by Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, this is housekeeping to bring forward items that were in progress or not yet completed from our budget previously. It's not affecting taxation. It's already accounted for in the previous budget. We're just bringing it forward for bookkeeping purposes.
Very good. Any other comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. And we're into item G. Councillor?
Yeah, Your Worship, I have a conflict declaration for item G due to a business relationship with the applicant, as well as for item H as a member of the Board of Directors for the Columbia Valley Skateboard Association, one of the skate park proponents.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Brothers.
Public Forum, Your Worship, that the city entered into an agreement with the Revelstoke Arts Council for the provision of entertainment during street festivals in the Plaza and for assisting with the management of the Performing Arts Center for a one-year term, and that the Mayor and Director of Corporate Administration be authorized to sign on behalf of the city.
Motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Anybody want to do this next one? Councillor Brothers?
I'll carry on. The council authorized staff to update the contract value to construct a skateboard park facility for a contract price of $824,000 plus GST, and that the Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture be authorized to execute the contract between the city and Uline Skate Park.
Motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Any comments, Laurie?
Your Worship, just that with the association securing additional funds, we were able to bring the project back into the full scope. So this is what the amendment is reflecting, is just adding elements that we removed back into the project.
Very good. Any comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Would you mind getting our councillor there? Thank you. We are on to communications, and the first item is the Tourism Infrastructure Committee minutes from April 11th. Does anybody have any comments on that? Anybody have any questions or comments on the Heritage Commission minutes of May 7th? The RCMP Community Policing Reports of March and April 2018. Questions from media? Nope. Looking for a motion pursuant to section 90.1A and J of the Community Charter to go in camera. Councillor English, Councillor Orlando, all those in favor, motion's carried. And we'll just take a